I used to really kind of joke about being a cheapskate, and I realized that it's not that I'm cheap. I've realized now because there are things some of you know that's not true. You are a cheapskate. I it's not that I'm cheap. I have come to realize I may have an addiction because I love a deal. I love making a deal. I love the haggle. I know some of you, when you hear the term haggle or negotiate, you break out in hives. There are two types of people: those that want to go to the car lot and those who stay home. I want to go to the car lot. We're not even buying a car. I just go argue for an hour and then leave. That's what I've realized. I love it. I'm having a little issue here. Here we go. And so what I've come to realize is that I love when there is a deal. Now, I know for many of you, the social media, the Facebook, InstaWebs, all that's fun. I'll do that every once in a while, but my addiction is in the marketplace. I love the buying and selling of stuff we don't need. I love it. I bought a shovel for $1 yesterday. $1. It's the best deal. And so those are the things. There's something about it, but there are moments when you see something advertised and you're trying to figure out. So when it says it's a 2019 Lincoln for $1,500. Now, most people, warnings go off. It's too good to be true. It must be a scam, right? Not me. I'm like, this is a deal. And when we get into it, we begin to realize that after you try to drive it and you realize it won't start, you begin to realize it's not a real deal at all. We do the same thing maybe in our relationships. You see people from afar, you begin to build some relationship with them, and you're thinking, do I trust them? How far do I let them in? And it takes a little bit of living life with them before you can determine they're a real deal. It takes some adventures. It takes some meals. And typically what we do is we share a safe story of our life to see, one, how they respond, and two, if they're a leak, right? There's only then if they handle that well, then later on down the road, when we keep investigating, then we decide how much to share again. And then maybe we take it up a notch. We share a little more. We share a little more. We share a little more. And we begin to make a determination, are they a real deal or is it a bust? Now, Pastor Keith, last week, he started this series on this authentic faith. And that was the foundation of an authentic faith is the life-changing message of Jesus Christ. That when you invite and accept this invitation to life with him, it begins to change us, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. So this week, we're going to talk about what does that look like when we're living that authentic life and sharing that authentic life with others. Now, next week, we'll look at what it means to share it with the world. But this week, how do we really evaluate, is it a real deal relationship we have here? Because we all crave an authentic relationship. We crave transparency. We crave to be with people in a genuine or original relationship. And when it comes basically to relationships, we want to know, are they trustworthy? Are they true? That what they're saying, does it add up? Now, we talked, briefly about this social media side, but if you notice, there's these filters on social media that we can we take the picture and we can begin to shape people differently. We can make them skinnier. We can make their muscles bigger. We can make their hair different color. We can change the color of their eyes. We can do this. And for some reason, we like to put animal noses and ears on people and create these faces. It is beyond me why I would want that. But people do it. And they create this because it's not an authentic or genuine relationship. We're wanting people to go, I want to be like them. So what we're going to look at today is, what does this mean to have this authentic relationship? One of the phrases we use at VNC a lot is that our creed and our deed will be in alignment. So who we say we are and what we are actually meshes. We don't want to live different than that. We want it to be there. We want there to be a harmony between who people see us as, what they see, what we're doing and how we're living, and who we really are. So what holds us back? What is holding us back from living that authentic type life? Maybe you've been rejected. Maybe you've been hurt or betrayed. Maybe we begin to think that people aren't going to like us. They're not going to like us for who we really are. Maybe you have been vulnerable with someone. Maybe you've tried to be authentic. And you know, when you are having to share your story, you know what I'm talking about. When something has happened and you just need someone to listen. You just need someone anybody will do really, if they could just sit here for a second and let me just tell you what I'm going through. Let me tell you what's happening in my life. And you spew all of these things out. But that person wasn't, they just asked, do you want some coffee? And they weren't ready to receive what you just laid on them. Or maybe you've shared this information, you've shared this story, this hurt, this embarrassment, this past sin, and maybe they use it against you. But there's these things that happen when we're trying to be authentic. We have learned that it is safer not to be that authentic. It's actually, we found it safer not even to be transparent, that we just kind of wall it up, we hide it, we protect ourselves, and we try to protect our image or our reputation. We just don't want anyone else to hurt us. But it keeps us from walking this creed and deed in alignment. So we're going to look at the story of Paul and a little bit of a background just to make sure you're all on the same page. When you hear us talk about Paul, his original name was Saul, and he was a persecutor of the church. He was highly educated. He was informed. He had authority and power and responsibility. And he had taken it on himself to lead the charge to eradicate the Jesus movement. He said that Jesus was a false teacher. He was not the Messiah, and he wanted to bring the world back into alignment with what he had been taught. And he even had blood on his hands. He'd had blood on his hands from those that were speaking truth about who Jesus was. And he was having this moment where he is on the road to Damascus. When Mark talked about in his prayer, he talked about, do you remember when? Do you remember when? And one of the phrases you hear, do you remember when the scales fell off? Do you remember when you were able to see? That's kind of a reference back to Paul. Because when he was Saul and he was on his way on this Damascus road, Jesus appears to him and says, Saul, Saul, why? Why are you punishing me? Why are you persecuting me? And he goes through this conversion process where he spends 3 days blind. And as he accepts who Jesus is in his life, the scales fall off and he's no longer blind but can see. And he does this radical transformation from being this persecutor of the church to now the planter of the church. And it's this church in Corinth, the second letter in Corinth, that he is giving to this church. And he begins to talk to them. And what's happened is he has shared the ways he has been suffering, what has happened in his life, the way it has not turned out the way he thought. And he's talking about these things that have taken place. And the people are asking him, you need to share it. You need to be almost boastful about it. You need to be prideful about all the things that you have conquered. And so Paul writes them in this story, and he says, it's not about me to boast, but I'm going to actually talk to you about my weakness, not my strength. It's my weakness, because in my weakness, God is strong. And it's in that is what I'm going to talk to you about. So we're going to look in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. We'll be in a few verses there, but what we're going to read first is 12, 5 through the first part of 7. So 12, 5 through 7a. It says, I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool because I would be speaking the truth, but I refrain. So no one will think more of me than is warranted, but what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. So Paul wasn't trying to sell himself or promote himself or protect his image. He seemed pretty intentional on making sure we saw exactly who he is. He didn't want to make more of himself in other people's eyes. He wanted to make sure everybody was understanding, not just in the reader of that church, but for all time, that how is God showing up in my weaknesses? How is God showing up in my weaknesses? And he continues in the second half of 7 and 8. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I have given a thorn in my flesh. I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. So we'll just pause right there. We're gonna wrap that section up in just a second, but we'll pause here. Now, there's a lot of different ways to kind of unpack this verse because it's pretty meaty. But let's keep what it means to live this authentic life in mind. Because Paul is recognizing the danger in this unhealthy pride when he talks about to keep me from becoming conceited. That, Paul he was well educated, he was strong, he was a leader, he was natural. He had some gifts and abilities that would make it very easy to take the steps forward and say, look what I have done. Look at what I have done. And a reason we would hold back from being authentic, mostly, is our pride. So when you see people, when they're pounding their chest, look at me, look what I've done. It's really easy to move your eyes from what God is doing to what I am doing. And it's very easy for me to not see what God is doing, but to see what I've done. And to begin to believe in me. Begin to believe in what I have been naturally gifted for, what you have been naturally gifted for, what you do that you don't even think about it, you just do it automatically. Those are gifts and abilities and talents, and everybody in this room has them. Everybody online, you have gifts and abilities, and when we begin to trust them more than our Heavenly Father, it becomes prideful. And it becomes, look at me, look at me, look at me. And we kind of crave that. And Paul wanted to make sure, Paul is writing this passage, this section, for people to say, stop pounding your chest. Stop pounding your chest. Because it's really easy to get there. Now, let's talk about this thorn in the flesh. Let's talk about that for just a second and what that looks like. Now, there's a lot of different opinions and theories, and a lot of people have written about this, about what that would be. And we're not going to dive into that today. But we are going to talk about a little bit of it. That the amazing to me is that Paul, the writer of 13 books in the New Testament, the planter of church, the first missionary of the church, the global church, the first missionary of the global church, the planter of all these churches, the writer, the mentor, all these things that he is, he makes sure that the church then, the church today, and the church forever understood that he didn't hide that he had an issue. He didn't hide it. He didn't lie about it. He didn't ignore it. In fact, he wrote it down for everybody to have. I wonder what it would have been like for the church to take the scroll that's been passed down, and it's like, hey, everybody, we got this letter from Paul. He wants us to read it to all of you. We're going to pass it around. There may not have been a big gathering like this or a city square. It more than likely would have gone home to home to home where families were gathering for church, and they would have passed this letter around. This scroll would have opened up, and it would have said something like this: I asked 3 times for this pain, this thorn in my flesh, this thorn in my side to be removed, and it wasn't. That's not encouraging. Everybody would have been like, ooh, but you're kind of got a cape and an S on your chest. Paul, you're kind of a Superman, but why would you tell us this? It's kind of vulnerable. It's kind of risky for Paul to write this down and let the church read it. Was it worth the risk to share his vulnerability and the reality that he was in? I mean, I wonder have you ever come across a situation where you're in the lobby here at VNC, or maybe you're watching TV and you see a believer, you see them across the room, or they're speaking or they're sharing, and you think they have it all together. Look at them. They've got it. They got it. I wish I was like him. I wish I was like her. I mean, they seem to always do the right things. And they just seem so amazing. And maybe then you begin to think, I'm not. Without realizing that if Saul, who becomes Paul, the writer of the 13 books in the New Testament, the first missionary of the church, the planter of churches that we read about and we talk about, made sure everybody understood he had a thorn in his flesh. He had an issue that he could not shake. We all have an issue. We all got stuff we're dealing with. We all got things that press on us and push on us. That almost everybody, I believe, I would say everybody online today or in this room, there is something that we have probably prayed about and said, Lord, remove this from my life. My life would be so much better if. I would be so much more productive for the kingdom if. I would be a better husband. I'd be a better wife. I would be a better student. I would be a better aunt. I'd be a better uncle. I would be a better driver. I would be a better whatever. If you would just remove this. Father, if you would just take this away from me. Rest assured today that Paul and you and I all have something in common. We have prayed about an issue, a very serious issue, and the answer was no. Not even I'll think about it. Not even, if you give a little more money, if you make a deeper commitment, if you do some of these things, then I'll take care of the thorn in your flesh. It's not how it works. In fact, it almost feels a little bit ignored. And you and I have something unbelievably in common with Paul. I mean, I know that I have prayed about things in my life, and I've tried to up the ante a little bit with God, and I've said, you know what, I'll be a little bit more committed. I'm going to read the whole Bible every day. I mean, cover to cover. It's all I'm going to do. If you'll just take care of this thing, we will give more money. We will do whatever. We're going to double down on all of our efforts. If you will, God, now listen, I'm only going to make this offer once. You been there? Have you been there where you've tried to negotiate and barter your prayers to be answered? Paul's saying, I prayed 3 times. I pleaded with the Lord. I begged the Lord. And I'm sure and if we had been there, we'd been like, I vouch for Paul. God, you got to fix that. I mean, good night. Look at him. And this is how productive he's been with all these issues. Think of what he could do if you take care of it. Think of what he could do if you just fix it. So God, we talk about your power. We talk about where you're at. We talk about your strength. We talk about all the gifts and abilities. We talk about that you know everything and there's nothing you can't do. And then here I am. I'm asking you just to fix the problem. Dadgummit, God, fix it. Just fix it. But then he gets this answer. Verse 9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in the weaknesses, in the insults, in the hardships, in the persecutions, in the difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So instead of removing the thorn, instead of pulling it out of his flesh and making him whole, God gave him and kept him giving him through grace. He kept giving it to him through the grace. Now, do not leave today without catching this phrase. That there are times in your life when sometimes grace will remove the load, that the grace will step in and it pulls the thorn right out of the flesh. The other times, he gives us the strength to bear the load. Sometimes you're healed, and sometimes you get the strength to walk through it. Either way, God saw it, and Paul saw it as a blessing from God. See, grace is not this weak or wimpy thing. It's not this all dogs go to heaven deal. It is the ever-living power of God that comes to work in our lives, that his grace is sufficient. His grace is sufficient. No matter what you are facing, whatever I am facing, his grace meets us. It is sufficient, and his love is enough. So his grace is sufficient, and his love is enough. So whatever you've been praying for, whatever big, audacious goal and prayer you've been praying, that God, I need you. God, please step in, that he's telling you, I'm with you. I may not heal you. I may not heal you, but I'll walk with you. And my grace is sufficient, and my love is enough. I mean, this grace is the kind that holds you up. It strengthens you, brings you comfort. It's the kind that helps you take the next step forward. And it is in weakness that his grace is realized. It is in the weakness that Paul is saying that I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't do this on my own. I couldn't make it. I'm not strong enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm not whatever. He was saying, I can't do this. And what it ended up saying is where his authenticity came when God made Paul dependent on God's grace. That's the sign of maturity. When you and I say, I can't do it on my own. Stop looking at me. I can't do it on my own. I can't. That's the definition of maturity, that I need you. I am so dependent on you. I'm not going to make it through this day. I'm not going to make it through this week or this month or this year. I'm not going to make it through this surgery. I'm not going to make it through the doctor's appointment. I'm not going to make it through the meeting with my boss. I'm not going to make it through raising my children. I'm not going to make it through my life as single. I'm not going to make it through my life as a widow. I'm not going to make it as a widower. I'm not going to make it. I can't do this on my own. And it's when you and I finally say those words that I can't, but he can. It's when we move into that maturity where our lives become authentic. We crave authentic people. We crave people who live in transparency. And this is what this passage is about, no matter what the thorns are. And so good news today. If Paul struggled, we are too. I know it didn't feel like a prize. But Paul said in the midst of all the pain, all the hurt, all that he was going through, and all the things that he prayed so desperately for, that he gave the same phrase that he probably gave others who would come up to him and said, Paul, I'm hurting. And he probably said, you got to pray about this. Paul, I need this relationship restored. You got to pray about this. Paul, what do I do? He gave the same advice. His grace is sufficient. And if he struggled, you and I will. Which means these things that you and I are facing, the things that we are walking through right now, do not have to be a subject of defeat and discouragement, rather victory. Satan wants nothing more than for you and I to live in the valley of defeat and discouragement. That's a goal. I want you to live defeated. I want you to live discouraged. I want you to keep trying to do it yourself. You just keep working that out. In fact, I believe he props us up and gives us some things to make us think that we can't. Gives us a little shove, a little push. So today, as we look at that, it's about us being honest and living that life and understanding it's not about me. It's about him. So what I want us to do is last week, Keith had done the survey, and we've got another one for you today, a little poll we're going to take. And you can take out your phones or your tablets, and you can jump on. It'll be up on the screens. It's the Valpo/poll that you can jump on. And just to be honest for a minute, to breathe and reflect, you can look at it. On a scale of 1 to 5, how would you describe your relationship with God? And if you just take the poll, you'll see that answers, you can go ahead and start taking them. And now that 1 to 5, 1 being what we would say is the bottom and 5 being the best, you can see that number 1, honestly, I feel like there really isn't anything there, that my relationship's not there. Maybe number 2 is there's a spiritual wilderness and I'm in it. The third one is sort of status quo. I'm not really moving forward, backward. I'm not really going forward either. The fourth one is I'm in a good place. I'm enjoying the journey. I truly feel like I'm growing and trusting. And the fifth one is I've never felt more in sync with the Holy Spirit as I am right now. So go ahead and start. You can take the survey. You can see online. Feel free. Please jump on. We want people taking the survey and being a part of this as we begin to see this is our first step in living that authentic life, is identifying where you really are. Identifying where you're at right now. Because we understand that in our life, as the numbers keep coming in our life, we understand that seasons of our life change and it impacts our lives. And maybe it impacts the intimacy that you've experienced with God. Where there's been these days where maybe you've been on a retreat, you've been on a getaway, you did a canyon hike or a mission trip, and you came back and you said, I'm at the pinnacle of my relationship. I've seen God work and I am there. It's changing me. Or maybe you've gone through some deep, dark periods in your life. Words that have hurt. Actions that have caused conflict. And you feel maybe an annoying apathy or disconnected. But there's something about this life that is shared in authenticity that it helps us to take the steps that God wants. As you see these numbers begin, they keep going and changing as people are going through their story and really being honest. Here's the challenge for you today. Invite someone into your story. This doesn't mean that you sit down and you spew every dark secret that's ever been there. That's not what we're talking about. It's to find someone, maybe in your life group or in another setting, that you begin to walk out this life with. You can share some of your hopes, your dreams, your fears. It's not all about what is happening in this moment in time, but it's about how do we walk this out? How do we share our authentic lives with other people? Maybe it just needs to be more of a culture in your life group. Or maybe you're thinking, there's some things in my life, this habits and hurts and hangups. I need to be in part of Celebrate Recovery, where authenticity is the very foundation, where you got to come clean. You got to just admit who you are, where you are, and what you are. It's a group that meets every week that is welcoming and loving for you to come a part of and be able to share where you're at. Or maybe there's some deep hurt. Deeper pain that's more than just a conversation. There are counselors available. We got counselors here at VNC that would love to meet with you, to begin to share what walking us through these pains and these hurt. When we talk about this maturity, this authentic life, this transparent life, it is about us sharing and modeling our dependence on the Heavenly Father. To really be an authentic life, and we've got to share our dependence on Him, not on us.